Atlas had waited through rain, darkness, and 2 empty mornings. But on the third day, Caleb Rowe finally understood that the German Shepherd was not waiting for a bus. He was waiting for one passenger. Dawn came gray over the quiet road outside Camp Pendleton, turning the wet pavement silver beneath a sky heavy with clouds. The old-school bus stop stood beside a line of wind-bent trees, its metal roof ticking softly as cold rain slipped from the edges. No children used the stop anymore. The route had been changed months earlier, and weeds had begun growing through cracks near the bench. Still, Atlas sat beneath the shelter as if the morning schedule had never changed. His black and tan coat was dark with rain, his ears upright, his amber eyes fixed on the curve nearly a quarter-mile away. Caleb pulled his pickup onto the shoulder and shut off the engine. For a moment, he remained behind the wheel, watching the dog through the windshield. He had brought Atlas home twice already. The first time, he had coaxed him into the truck with warm food and a dry blanket. The second time, he had clipped on the leash and walked him back nearly 2 miles in steady rain. Both mornings, before sunrise, Atlas had slipped away and returned to the same bench. Caleb stepped out with a folded wool blanket under one arm and a leash in his hand. He was 36, broad-shouldered, pale-skinned, and still carried himself with the quiet precision of a United States Marine, even when no one was watching. Water gathered along the brim of his cap as he approached. Atlas looked at him once, then returned his gaze to the road. "You are making this difficult," Caleb said softly. The dog did not move. Caleb draped the blanket across the bench and sat beside him. The metal was cold through his uniform pants. Around them, the morning smelled of wet asphalt, eucalyptus, and distant ocean air. A delivery truck passed without slowing. Atlas lifted his head, listened, then settled again. 5 minutes later, the low growl of a diesel engine rose beyond the curve. Atlas stood. Every muscle in his body tightened with hope. A yellow school bus appeared through the rain, headlights glowing against the gray morning. Caleb felt the dog lean forward. The bus came closer. Atlas stepped to the edge of the shelter. But the vehicle did not signal. It did not slow. It rolled past them, empty except for the driver, sending a fine spray across the roadside. Atlas watched until the red lights disappeared beyond the trees. Then he returned to the bench and placed one paw on the empty space to his right. Caleb looked at that untouched section of metal. He had noticed it before, but had not understood. Atlas always sat on the left. He never stretched across the whole bench. He guarded the right side as if someone had reserved it. Caleb clipped the leash to the dog's harness, but he did not pull. "Who sat there?" he asked. Atlas lowered his nose to the seat, breathed in slowly, and looked toward the curve again. Caleb followed his gaze. The stop was empty. The road was empty. Yet the dog's certainty filled the small shelter like a promise that had not expired. Caleb remained beside Atlas as the rain softened to a mist. The leash hung loose between them, more a sign of connection than control. He had handled nervous dogs before, dogs that froze at sudden sounds or paced through unfamiliar rooms, but Atlas was not confused. He was waiting with purpose. Caleb checked the shelter, the roadside, and the narrow drainage ditch beyond the curb. There were no fresh tire marks, no dropped backpack, no sign that anyone had been there that morning. The bus stop itself had been inactive for nearly 4 months, ever since the school district rerouted students to a larger pickup point closer to the highway. Caleb had already confirmed it with the transportation office. No child was scheduled to use this stop. No missing person report had been filed. Nothing on paper explained the dog beside him. He looked at Atlas. "You know something I do not." Atlas kept his eyes on the curve. Caleb had first been assigned to him 7 months earlier through a family support program connected to the base. Atlas had completed rehabilitation after years of working service, and his new role was quieter. He visited counseling rooms, sat beside military spouses during difficult meetings, and rested near children who were not ready to speak. Caleb had learned that Atlas noticed details other people missed. A tightening jaw, a shaking hand, a child pretending not to cry. Still, he had never seen him refuse a return command. The first morning Atlas disappeared, Caleb found the back gate unlatched and followed muddy paw prints almost 2 miles to the shelter. He assumed the dog had chased a scent. He brought him home, checked the fence, and secured the latch. By the second dawn, Atlas had pushed through a loose section near the side yard and returned again. The security camera showed him moving at a steady trot, never wandering, never stopping. Straight to the bus stop. Caleb had reviewed the footage 3 times. Atlas arrived at 6:22 each morning, sat on the left side of the bench, and watched the same curve. At 6:45, when the old route once passed, he stood. That was the first pattern. The second was sound. Each time a vehicle applied air brakes in the distance, Atlas raised his head. Each time metal keys or buckles jingled nearby, his ears turned toward the noise. The third pattern was the empty space. He never occupied the right side of the bench. Caleb had placed food there the previous evening, thinking hunger might break the habit. Atlas moved the bowl to the ground without touching the seat. Now Caleb ran one gloved hand across the wet metal. Near the far edge, beneath a patch of peeling blue paint, he found 3 shallow scratches and a faint red thread caught around a bolt. Atlas leaned in immediately. His nose touched the thread. His breathing changed. Caleb pinched it gently between 2 fingers. It looked like nylon from a backpack strap. Red, bright once, though the rain had dulled it. Atlas pressed one paw against the same spot and looked up at Caleb. The answer was beginning to take shape. Someone had sat there often enough for the dog to remember the place, the sounds, and the exact hour. Caleb took out his phone and opened the archived family support schedule. He searched the bus stop address. One old entry appeared from the previous school year. Harper Lily, age 10. Afternoon transport approved. Caleb stared at the name. He remembered a quiet girl with a red backpack who used to wait outside the counseling center with Atlas at her feet. Then he saw the emergency contact listed beneath her name. Staff Sergeant Aaron Harper. Status: extended medical treatment. Caleb looked toward the empty road. Atlas had not come here because he was lost. He had come because Lily had once promised to return. Caleb kept the old schedule open on his phone while the memory returned in pieces. Lily Harper had been small for 10, with a red backpack that looked almost too large for her narrow shoulders and a silver key charm clipped to the zipper. She rarely spoke during the first weeks at the family support center. While other children drew pictures or played games, Lily sat near the window and watched the parking lot, waiting for news about her father. Staff Sergeant Aaron Harper had been receiving long-term medical care several hours away, and every update seemed to arrive in language too careful for a child. Stable. Monitoring. More tests. Lily understood enough to know that adults sometimes used quiet words for frightening things. Atlas found her before Caleb did. One afternoon, the German shepherd crossed the room and lay beside her chair without command. Lily looked down at him, surprised, then slowly placed one hand on his back. Atlas did not move. From that day forward, he waited for her after every school bus arrival. Caleb would walk him past the old stop at 3:15, just as the yellow bus came around the curve. The brakes sighed. The folding door opened. Lily stepped down with her red backpack bouncing against her coat. The silver charm on the zipper gave a small metallic ring each time she moved. Atlas always heard it before Caleb saw her. His ears lifted. His tail struck the pavement once. Lily would sit on the right side of the bench, leaving the left for Atlas. She carried a small paper pouch in her backpack with 2 bone-shaped dog biscuits inside. One was for the afternoon. The other was saved for the next day. She broke each biscuit in half, gave Atlas one piece, and kept the other in the pouch. "So you know I am coming back?" she told him once. Caleb had smiled at the seriousness in her voice. "He probably believes you." Lily looked at him. "Then I should not make promises I cannot keep." After that, every afternoon ended the same way. Lily stood, adjusted the straps of her backpack, shook the silver charm once, and said, "Tomorrow." Atlas watched until she and her mother turned the corner toward their apartment. Caleb had thought it was a routine. To Atlas, it had become something closer to a vow. The last day Caleb saw Lily, the air had been warm and dry. She sat longer than usual, holding half a biscuit between her fingers without offering it. "Dad is moving to another hospital," she said. "Mom says we might have to go too." Caleb crouched beside her. "Do you know when?" Lily shook her head. Atlas rested his chin on her knee. She touched the fur between his ears. "What if tomorrow is not tomorrow?" she whispered. Caleb did not know how to answer. Lily took an old bus ticket from her pocket, turned it over, and wrote something in pencil. Then she slid it beneath the far edge of the bench. "Just in case," she said. The next afternoon, the bus came but did not stop. The following morning, Caleb learned the Harper family had left before dawn to be closer to Aaron's treatment center. There had been no time for goodbyes. The apartment was empty. The phone number on file no longer worked. Caleb found the ticket under the bench later that week. On the back, in uneven handwriting, Lily had written, "Please wait until I come back." He had placed it in his wallet, thinking it might be returned one day. Months passed. The route changed. The stop fell silent. Atlas stopped visiting it. Until 3 mornings ago. Caleb now understood why the dog protected the right side of the bench. Lily had always sat there. He reached into his wallet and removed the faded ticket. The moment Atlas saw it, he stood. Caleb held it near his nose. The dog breathed in, then touched the paper gently with his muzzle. On the bottom edge, beneath Lily's message, Caleb noticed a second line he had never seen before, written smaller and darker. Friday after the first rain. He looked at the wet road, the gray sky, and the date on his phone. It was Friday. The first rain of the season had begun 3 days earlier. Atlas placed one paw on the empty seat and turned toward the curve. Caleb felt the certainty settle over him. The dog had not returned randomly. Somewhere, somehow, Lily had given him a date. Caleb read the second line again while rain whispered against the metal roof. Friday after the first rain. The words were too deliberate to be an accident, yet they raised more questions than they answered. Lily had written them months before the route changed, before the Harper family left town, before anyone could have known when the season would break. Caleb turned the ticket over, searching for another mark, another clue. There was nothing. Atlas watched him closely, then looked back toward the curve. "You remembered this," Caleb said. The dog stepped off the bench and pressed his nose to the ticket once more. Caleb thought about the day Lily had hidden it beneath the seat. She had not simply asked Atlas to wait. She had chosen a time. Maybe Friday had been the day her mother once promised they would return. Maybe the first rain had been something Aaron loved, a family tradition, a signal that meant home. Caleb opened the archived contact file again and called every number connected to the Harpers. One was disconnected. Another rang without answer. The emergency contact led to a retired nurse in Oceanside who had not heard from the family in months. Caleb then called the family support office and asked for any recent update. The woman on the line searched quietly. "There was a request 2 days ago," she said at last. A woman named Rebecca Harper asked whether the old bus stop was still there. Caleb straightened. "Did she leave a number?" "Only a note. She said they might visit Friday afternoon." Caleb looked at the time. 10:30 in the morning. "Did she say why?" The woman hesitated. "She mentioned Staff Sergeant Harper passed away last week." The road seemed to lose its sound. Caleb lowered the phone. Atlas remained still, but his eyes stayed fixed on him. The timing was no longer mysterious. The first rain had not called the dog back. Something else had. For the past 3 days, Caleb had carried Lily's ticket in his wallet while walking Atlas near the same route. The rain had softened the old paper, releasing whatever scent remained. Atlas had recognized it and followed the memory straight to the stop. The date on the ticket had done the rest for Caleb. There was no miracle that needed explaining. Only memory, scent, habit, and a child's promise waiting to be understood. Caleb sat beside Atlas again. "She may come," he said, "but we do not know when." Atlas settled on the left side of the bench. The right remained empty. By noon, the rain had stopped. A local woman from the house across the road brought a bowl of water and a dry towel. She had watched Atlas return each morning and had begun leaving food beneath the shelter. "He barely touches it," she said. "Every time he hears a bus, he stands." Caleb thanked her and dried Atlas's coat. At 1:30, a delivery van slowed near the curb. Atlas rose. It passed. At 2:10, an old yellow shuttle turned the curve. Atlas stood again, ears high, body leaning forward. The shuttle continued without stopping. Each disappointment seemed small from the outside, but Caleb felt the dog's hope tighten and release like a heartbeat. At 3:15, the hour Lily school bus once arrived, Atlas moved to the edge of the shelter. No vehicle appeared. The road stayed empty. Caleb checked his phone. No message. No call. The sky darkened again, and a cold wind moved through the trees. He considered taking Atlas home before nightfall, but the dog placed one paw on the right side of the bench and looked at him. Caleb understood. He spread the dry blanket over both halves of the seat and sat down. "All right," he said. "We wait together." The afternoon thinned toward evening. Headlights began to glow on the wet road. Then, just before 5, a faded station wagon appeared beyond the curve. It slowed long before reaching the stop. Atlas stood so quickly the leash slid across Caleb's knee. The car pulled onto the shoulder opposite them and came to a quiet halt. For several seconds, no door opened. Then a woman stepped out, one hand gripping the roof as if gathering strength. She turned toward the passenger side. A red backpack rose into view behind the glass. Atlas did not move. He only stared, trembling, while someone inside reached for the door handle. The passenger door opened slowly. A girl stepped onto the wet shoulder wearing a dark knit cap and holding the same red backpack Caleb remembered from months before. She had grown thinner, and the easy movement of childhood had been replaced by something careful, as though every step required permission. Rebecca Harper came around the front of the station wagon and reached for her daughter's hand, but Lily kept both arms around the backpack. Atlas stood beneath the shelter, trembling from nose to tail, yet he did not run. Caleb felt the leash tighten once, then go still. The dog was waiting for proof. Lily looked across the road. For a moment, her face showed nothing. Then she lifted one hand to the silver charm clipped to the backpack zipper and shook it gently. The small metallic ring carried through the damp air. Atlas's ears rose. Lily reached into the front pocket and removed a paper pouch. From inside, she took half of a bone-shaped biscuit, softened at the edges from being carried too long. Her fingers shook as she held it up. "Tomorrow took longer than I thought," she said. Atlas stepped forward. One pace, then another. He stopped at the edge of the road and looked back at Caleb. Caleb checked for traffic, crossed with him, and loosened the leash. "Go ahead," he whispered. Atlas moved. Not wildly, not without control. He crossed the last few yards with the steady urgency of a promise finally being allowed to end. Lily dropped to her knees before he reached her. Atlas stopped directly in front of her, lowered his head, and pressed it against her chest. The biscuit slipped from her hand onto the wet pavement. Lily wrapped both arms around his neck and began to cry. Atlas stood perfectly still, his body curved around her as if shielding something fragile from the rain. Rebecca covered her mouth and turned her face away. Caleb remained several feet back, giving them room. He had seen reunions before. Most were loud. This one carried almost no sound beyond Lily's breathing and the soft jingle of the silver charm against Atlas's harness. "I thought you would forget," she whispered into his fur. Atlas lifted one paw and placed it lightly against her knee. Lily laughed through her tears, then cried harder. Rebecca approached Caleb with an envelope held against her coat. "Aaron asked me to bring her here," she said. Her voice was tired but clear. "He wrote the note before things became difficult." Caleb looked at the envelope. "He knew about the ticket?" Rebecca nodded. Lily told him where she left it. "He said if she ever became afraid to come home, this was the place we should start." She looked toward her daughter. After he passed, she stopped speaking about the base. She packed the backpack but would not leave the house. "Then I found this in his things." Rebecca handed Caleb the envelope. Inside was a photograph of Lily sitting on the right side of the bench with Atlas at her feet. On the back, Aaron had written, "She thinks people leave because she was not enough to make them stay. Bring her back to the one soul who never measured her worth by how long she was gone." Caleb read the sentence twice. Beneath the photograph was the torn half of a bus ticket. The jagged edge matched the piece in his wallet. He placed the two halves together in his palm. One carried Lily's promise. The other carried Aaron's response. "I will make sure he waits." Caleb looked toward Atlas. The dog had not known about Aaron's final message. He had not understood illness, distance, or grief the way people did. He had remembered a seat, a sound, a scent, and a child who always said tomorrow. Sometimes that was enough to look like grace. Lily finally leaned back and studied Atlas's face. "Were you here every day?" she asked. Caleb walked closer. "For 3 days," he said. He would not leave. Lily looked at the empty right side of the bench across the road. "He saved my place." Atlas turned toward the shelter. Then he looked back at Lily, waiting for her to follow. Lily followed Atlas across the road with Rebecca and Caleb close behind. The rain had nearly stopped, leaving small drops clinging to the shelter roof, and the red backpack darkened along the seams. Atlas climbed beneath the awning and returned to the left side of the bench. He did not jump up or circle. He simply sat where he had waited through 3 mornings and looked at the empty place beside him. Lily stood before the right side for several seconds. Her hand rested on the backpack strap, and the silver charm gave one faint sound as she breathed. Then she sat down. Atlas leaned against her leg. The movement was so small Caleb almost missed it, but Lily did not. She placed one hand on the dog's shoulder and looked toward the curve in the road. Dad used to say the first rain made everything smell honest, she said. Rebecca lowered herself onto the far edge of the bench. He always liked this time of year. Caleb took the joined bus ticket from his palm and handed it to Lily. She studied the two torn halves, running one finger along the jagged seam. Her own penciled words sat beside Aaron's promise as if distance had never separated them. Please wait until I come back. I will make sure he waits. Lily pressed the ticket against her chest. He knew I would be scared. Rebecca nodded. He knew coming back would hurt. Then why did he want me to? Rebecca looked toward Atlas. Maybe because he also knew staying away would hurt longer. Lily did not answer. She watched a drop of water slide from the edge of the shelter and strike the pavement below. Atlas rested his chin on her knee. Caleb could see the questions moving across her face, questions no adult could settle with one sentence. Why had her father left? Why had the world continued? Why had the dog remembered when time had changed everything else? Caleb sat on the low curb opposite them. Atlas did not understand why you were gone, he said. He only remembered that you said you would return. Lily looked down at the dog. Was he sad? Caleb considered the truth. He was certain. That answer seemed to reach her more deeply than comfort would have. Atlas had not waited because he believed nothing could change. He had waited because one promise had survived the change. Rebecca opened the station wagon and brought back a small cardboard box from the rear seat. Inside were a few of Aaron's belongings, a folded field cap, a photograph album, a baseball, and a paperback book with worn corners. Lily lifted the book and gave a quiet breath of recognition. He read this at the hospital. She opened the cover. Aaron's handwriting filled the inside page. For Lily, when home feels far away, begin with one familiar place. Beneath the sentence, he had drawn a small bus stop and a dog sitting on the left side of a bench. Lily traced the drawing. He planned all of this. Rebecca shook her head gently. He hoped for it. There is a difference. Caleb understood what she meant. Aaron could not command grief to release his daughter. He could only leave behind a path she might choose when ready. Atlas stood and nudged the paperback with his nose, then looked at Lily. She smiled faintly. You want me to read? The dog settled at her feet. Lily opened to the first page. Her voice was quiet at first, nearly lost beneath the dripping roof and distant tires on wet pavement. Rebecca listened. Caleb listened. Atlas closed his eyes. The story in the book did not mention hospitals, promises, or goodbye. It was only an old adventure about a child finding the road home. Yet as Lily read, the abandoned bus stop changed around them. It no longer felt like the place where she had vanished. It became the place where her father had left a direction, where Atlas had guarded a seat, and where her own voice had finally returned. When she finished the first chapter, Lily broke the softened biscuit in half. She gave one piece to Atlas and placed the other carefully inside her backpack. For next time, she said. Atlas took the biscuit gently. Caleb looked toward the dark road and understood that tomorrow had finally arrived. In the weeks that followed, Lily returned to the old bus stop every Friday afternoon. Rebecca drove her from their temporary apartment near the base, and Caleb arrived with Atlas a few minutes before 3. The first visit was quiet. Lily sat on the right side of the bench. Atlas took his place on the left, and neither seemed to need anything more. The second week, she brought Aaron's worn paperback and read 2 chapters aloud. By the third, she carried a small wooden box filled with blank cards, pencils, and dog biscuits wrapped in paper. For people who need somewhere to sit, she explained. Caleb looked at the abandoned shelter, its peeling paint and rusted bolts softened by the late afternoon sun. Then we should make it worth sitting here. He contacted the county transportation office and received permission to repair the unused structure as part of a community support project. Marines from Caleb's unit volunteered on a Saturday morning. They replaced the damaged roof panel, sanded the bench, and painted the shelter a calm shade of blue. A local carpenter built a weatherproof cabinet for books and message cards. Rebecca planted rosemary near the curb because Aaron had once said the scent reminded him of home. Lily painted a small wooden sign for the inside wall. She did not write her father's name. She wrote, "You do not have to explain why you are tired." The stop began attracting families from the support center. Some came to read. Some left notes. Others sat in silence while Atlas rested nearby. Caleb noticed that Lily never asked visitors what they had lost. She offered a pencil, a book, or half a biscuit for Atlas. She understood now that comfort did not always begin with questions. One Friday, she found a card tucked inside the wooden box. The handwriting belonged to a child. "My brother is gone, and everyone wants me to talk about him. I do not know how." Lily read the words twice, then placed the card in her backpack. "Can we ask the center if they know who wrote this?" Caleb shook his head gently. "The cards are anonymous." Lily looked toward the road. "Then how do we help?" Caleb sat beside her. "We keep the seat open." The following week, a woman arrived with a boy about 9 years old. He wore a gray sweatshirt despite the warm weather and kept both hands deep inside the front pocket. His name was Ethan. His mother introduced him, but he did not speak. Lily recognized the handwriting on the card when she saw the way he stared at the wooden box. She did not mention it. She moved several feet down the bench and left the middle space open. Atlas lay beneath the shelter, watching quietly. Ethan sat at the far edge, his shoulders rigid. Lily opened Aaron's paperback and began reading without asking whether he wanted to listen. After several minutes, she placed a bone-shaped biscuit on the bench between them. Atlas did not take it. He waited. Ethan glanced at the dog. "Is that for him?" he asked. It was the first sound he had made. Lily nodded. "Only if you want to give it to him." Ethan picked up the biscuit and held it toward Atlas. The German shepherd approached slowly, accepted it gently, then laid down between the two children. Ethan rested one hand against the dog's back. His shoulders lowered. Lily handed him a blank card and a pencil. "You do not have to write anything," she said. "You can just hold them." Caleb watched from his pickup across the road. The bus stop was no longer empty. The place Atlas had guarded for Lily had become a shelter for strangers carrying their own unfinished goodbyes. Aaron had left one path home for his daughter. Lily was quietly widening it for everyone who came after her. By late autumn, the old bus stop had become part of the community in a way no one had planned. The blue paint had faded slightly under the coastal sun, but the shelter remained clean, dry, and warm with signs of use. Books appeared in the cabinet faster than Caleb could count them. Some were children's stories. Others were journals, puzzle books, or collections of poems donated by families from the support center. The message cards multiplied too. A mother wrote that she had finally slept through the night. A teenager left a note saying he had spoken his brother's name aloud for the first time in months. Someone drew a German shepherd beneath the words, "Thank you for waiting." Lily read every card that did not ask for privacy. She never tried to fix the sorrow inside them. She placed each one in a weatherproof binder and returned it to the cabinet, as if every sentence deserved a safe place to remain. Atlas spent most Fridays beneath the bench, his head resting near Lily's shoes. Ethan began coming regularly with his mother. At first, he only held the blank cards. Then one afternoon, he wrote a single sentence. "My brother used to save the blue candy for me." He folded the card twice and placed it in the box. Lily did not ask what it meant. The next week, she brought a small bag of blue candy and left it beside him on the bench. Ethan looked at it for a long time before smiling. Caleb watched these moments from nearby and understood that the shelter worked because no one demanded progress. People arrived carrying grief at different speeds. The bus stop gave them permission to sit without being measured. Rebecca started bringing hot chocolate in a large thermos when the evenings turned colder. Marines from Caleb's unit stopped by after duty, sometimes to repair a loose hinge, sometimes simply to listen. The woman who had brought Atlas water during the 3 rainy mornings planted yellow flowers beside the rosemary. Even the school district added a small sign near the road asking drivers to slow down. One Friday, Lily arrived without the red backpack. Caleb noticed immediately. She carried a smaller canvas bag instead, light enough to rest on one shoulder. "What happened to the old one?" he asked. Lily looked toward Atlas. "I put it in Dad's box." Her voice held sadness, but not fear. "I do not need it every day anymore." The silver charm had been moved to the new bag. It rang once when she sat down. Atlas lifted his ears, then rested again. The sound no longer meant someone was leaving. It meant Lily had arrived. She opened the cabinet and found a new card written in careful block letters. "I am scared that if I feel better, it means I forgot." Lily read it quietly. Ethan looked over her shoulder. "That is not true," he said. "I know," Lily answered, "but it feels true sometimes." She took out a blank card and wrote a reply. Feeling warm again does not erase who kept you warm before. She placed the message in the front pocket of the cabinet where the next visitor would see it. Caleb felt the words settle into him. Lily had once believed returning home meant stepping back into pain. Now she was helping others understand that healing did not betray memory. Atlas rose and walked to the right side of the bench, the place he had once guarded for her. Lily smiled and moved closer so Ethan could sit there instead. The boy hesitated, then took the seat. Atlas lay across both children's feet. A school bus passed on the road, its yellow sides bright beneath the late afternoon sun. The brakes sighed at the intersection, and for the first time, Atlas did not lift his head. No one was missing from the curve. No promise remained unfinished. The place where he had waited was no longer built around absence. It had become a place where people came back to themselves. Winter passed, and the first warm days of spring brought new leaves to the eucalyptus trees along the road. The blue shelter still stood beneath them, no longer forgotten, its small cabinet filled with books, cards, and pencils worn short by many hands. On Friday afternoons, Lily arrived with Rebecca, Caleb brought Atlas, and Ethan often came with his mother. Sometimes other families joined them. Sometimes no one spoke. The place did not require conversation to prove it mattered. One afternoon, Lily found a new child sitting alone at the far end of the bench before anyone else arrived. He was younger than Ethan, with a green jacket zipped to his chin and a school backpack resting between his shoes. His mother waited near the curb, giving him space. Lily recognized the way he stared at the road without truly seeing it. She did not ask why he was there. She sat several feet away and placed half of a bone-shaped biscuit on the bench between them. Atlas laid down in the open space, his body forming a quiet bridge. The boy glanced at the dog. "Does he always wait here?" he asked. Lily looked toward the curve where she had once expected a bus that never stopped. "He used to," she said. "Who was he waiting for?" Lily rested one hand on Atlas's shoulder. "Someone who needed to come back." The boy thought about that. "Did they?" "Yes." His eyes moved toward the message box. "What if the person cannot come back?" Lily did not rush to answer. Caleb stood near his pickup, watching without interrupting. Rebecca held the thermos. Ethan sorted pencils inside the cabinet. Everyone seemed to understand that the next words belonged to Lily alone. She opened her canvas bag and removed the joined bus ticket, now protected inside a clear sleeve. She showed the boy the two halves. "Sometimes people come back," she said. "Sometimes they leave something that helps us find our way." The boy touched the sleeve lightly. Then he took a blank card and began to write. Atlas placed his head across the child's shoes. A school bus appeared at the end of the road, bright yellow beneath the afternoon sun. Its brakes sighed at the intersection before it continued past the shelter. Atlas did not stand. He did not search the windows or watch the road behind it. The person he had waited for was sitting beside him now, older, steadier, and brave enough to keep a seat open for someone else. Lily broke another biscuit in half. She gave one piece to Atlas and placed the other in the cabinet for tomorrow. Caleb looked at the shelter, at the children, and at the road stretching beyond them. 3 days of waiting had become months of healing. One empty seat had become a place where sorrow could rest without being hurried. Atlas had guarded a promise until Lily found the courage to return, and when she did, she discovered that he had protected more than her place on a bench. He had protected the path back to her own heart. The dog closed his eyes beneath Lily's hand. Around them, the road carried people away and brought others home, while the little shelter remained exactly where it was, waiting for anyone who still needed to believe that someone would stay.